3 days before my college graduation, my mom called to tell me she wouldn't be there. Not because she was sick, not because something terrible had happened. She called to tell me that my brother's girlfriend had just announced they were expecting, and the family wanted to throw them a surprise party that weekend. "It just worked out that way, honey," she said. "You understand, right? You always understand." I held the phone against my ear for a long time after she hung up. I was standing in my apartment in Columbus, still in my scrubs from a 12-hour shift at the hospital, and I remember looking at the invitation I'd mailed them 6 weeks earlier sitting on my kitchen counter. I'd sent it with a little handwritten note. "Can't wait to see you there." I was 26. It had taken me 4 years of night classes, weekend clinicals, and more student loan paperwork than I cared to remember to finish my nursing degree. I'd started school late because I spent 2 years saving up money first, working double shifts at a diner in Akron. No one helped me with tuition. No one co-signed anything. I did it alone, and I was proud of that, even when it was humiliating to be the oldest person in most of my classes. My brother Ryan had dropped out of 2 colleges. My parents still talked about him like he was a misunderstood genius taking a different path. When he got his girlfriend pregnant, they called it exciting news. When I graduated nursing school, my mom's first question was whether the hospital would give me benefits. That phone call was not the first time they'd done something like this. But for some reason, standing in that kitchen, it felt like the first time I really understood it was never going to change. My dad didn't call at all. I found out through my aunt that he agreed with the plan because, in his words, "Nora can handle it. Nora is me. I've apparently always been able to handle it." My roommate Becca found me sitting on the kitchen floor about an hour later. I wasn't crying. I was just sitting there, which she said was somehow worse. She made me tea and sat across from me and said, "Okay, so we fix this." I told her there was nothing to fix. The graduation was in 3 days. I'd already gotten my cap and gown. I wasn't going to skip it just because my family had somewhere better to be. "I know," she said. "That's not what I mean." Becca had met my clinical supervisor, Dr. Patricia Walsh, about a year earlier when she came to pick me up from a late shift, and Patricia was walking out at the same time. Patricia had been supervising my practicum rotations for 18 months by then. She was 61, semi-retired from surgery, and had gone back to teaching because she said she missed being around people who were still amazed by medicine. She was the kind of person who remembered every student's name on the first day and never forgot them. She'd written me 2 recommendation letters and had sat with me through a failed job interview, helping me understand what I could have answered differently. I'm telling you this so you understand what happened next wasn't a small thing. Becca called Patricia. I didn't know she was going to do that. I found out the next morning when Patricia sent me a text that said, "I heard your family has a conflict that weekend. I'd be honored to sit in the front row if you'll let me." I stood in my bathroom and read that text 4 times. I called her back. I told her she absolutely didn't have to do that I was fine going alone, that it wasn't a big deal. She cut me off, not unkindly, and said, "Nora, I've watched you work harder than almost anyone I've taught in 30 years. Someone should be there to see it. Let me be there." I said yes. My voice cracked a little when I said it, and I pretended it didn't, and she pretended not to notice. Here's what I haven't said yet. My parents did come to graduation, both of them. Ryan came too. They showed up, late, in the middle of the processional, and I watched from my place in line as an usher led them to 3 seats in the back section, the only ones left by then. My mom was in a floral dress. My dad had his hands in his pockets. Ryan was on his phone. Patricia was in the third row from the front, center aisle. She had a small bouquet of yellow tulips in her lap, which she had apparently bought at a grocery store on the way because, as she told me later, I didn't want to show up empty-handed. When I walked across that stage, I was looking for her face. I found it immediately. She was already standing. The photo someone took of that moment is still on my refrigerator. You can see the back of my cap and gown, and in the frame ahead of me you can see Patricia on her feet, clapping, tulips tucked under her arm. She's the only person standing in her section. Behind me, several rows back, you can see my mother still seated, looking at her program. I didn't plan it that way. I didn't engineer any of it. I'm telling you that because I want you to understand this isn't a story about revenge. I didn't want revenge. I wanted someone to show up. After the ceremony, my parents found me outside near the fountain where all the graduates were taking photos. My mom hugged me and said I looked beautiful. My dad actually shook my hand, and said he was proud. Ryan said congrats and immediately asked if we were going to lunch because he was starving. Patricia was standing a few feet away, giving us space. My mom noticed her and asked who she was. I said, "That's Dr. Walsh. She's been my supervisor for the last year and a half. She's the reason I got the position at the hospital." My mom smiled a polite smile and said, "How nice." Then she turned back to ask if I'd seen where Ryan had wandered off to. That was it. That was the whole moment. We went to lunch. All of us, which in retrospect was awkward in ways that were almost impressive. My parents talked almost entirely about Ryan's baby news, how they were already thinking about the guest room, whether my brother would go back to finish school now that he had extra motivation. Patricia sat next to me and we talked quietly about a new rapid response protocol the hospital was piloting, and at some point she ordered a slice of pie and slid half of it onto my plate without asking, which is the kind of thing that only people who really know you do. My parents left early to drive back to Akron. My mom hugged me again at the car. She said, "We'll celebrate properly soon, okay?" That was about 14 months ago. We haven't celebrated properly yet. About 6 weeks after graduation, I started my position at the hospital. It was a competitive spot in the cardiac step-down unit, and I got it partly because of Patricia's recommendation and partly because of the hours I'd put in during my practicum. I was terrified my first week. I called Patricia twice in a panic. She answered both times. That same month, my brother and his girlfriend broke up. The pregnancy had been real, but she miscarried at 10 weeks, and after that, things fell apart between them pretty quickly. My parents were devastated. They called me almost every day for a while, wanting to talk through it, wanting me to weigh in on whether Ryan should reach out to her, whether they should send flowers, what the right thing to do was. I answered when I could. I said what I thought was true. I didn't bring up the graduation. I'm not sure what would have been the point. What I did notice was that suddenly I was being called. Suddenly my opinion mattered. Suddenly my schedule was factored in. "Will you be working this Sunday? We were thinking of coming through Columbus." It was such a specific, disorienting shift. Like I'd passed some test I didn't know I was taking. The thing no one tells you about being the self-sufficient one in your family is that the job never officially ends. There's no moment where someone sits down and says, "We see now that we've been unfair." It just quietly starts to change, and you're left figuring out how much to let back in and how much to protect yourself from. My mom called in November, a few months after I started working, to tell me that my parents were in some financial trouble. Nothing catastrophic. My dad had taken a loan on their house for a business venture 2 years earlier, a franchise opportunity that hadn't worked out, and they were behind on payments. She was asking, I realized partway through the conversation, if I could help. I want to be honest here because I think it matters. My first reaction was not anger. My first reaction was the old familiar instinct, of course, "What do you need? I'll figure it out." That reflex runs deep. I had to consciously sit with the call for a minute before I responded. I told her I would think about it. She sounded surprised. I don't think anyone had ever told her that before. I talked to Patricia about it that week over coffee, not because she was a financial advisor, she wasn't, but because she was someone who knew me well enough to ask the right questions. She didn't tell me what to do. She asked me what I thought was fair. She asked me what I could actually afford. She asked me whether helping would make me feel good or whether it would just make me feel obligated. "Those are different things," she said. I thought about it for a few days. I thought about the graduation, about the phone call 3 days before it, about the fact that when I started nursing school, I asked my parents once if they could help with one semester's textbooks, about $400, and my mom said money was tight and they couldn't swing it, but that same month they put down a deposit on a camper van for a road trip Ryan wanted to take. I called my mom back. I told her I wasn't able to help financially right now. I told her I was still paying down my own loans and building savings and that I needed to prioritize my own stability. I said it as clearly and calmly as I could. She was quiet for a long moment and then said, "I understand," in the tone of someone who did not understand at all. That was hard. I'm not going to tell you it felt good, because that would be a lie. It felt like something closing, not slamming shut, just a quiet, deliberate closing of a door. What happened after that was not something I planned or predicted. My dad's business situation got more complicated over the winter. The franchise had apparently involved some agreements that weren't fully disclosed up front, and there were legal questions about how some of the money had been structured. I don't know all the details, they didn't share them with me, but by February they were talking about selling the house. Ryan, who had been living with them since the breakup, had to find somewhere else to go. He moved in with a college friend in Pittsburgh. My parents moved into a smaller rental in a suburb of Akron. My mom called to tell me, and I listened, and I said I was sorry they were going through it. I meant that. Here is what I also knew. If I had given them money in November, it would have been gone by February. And I would have been further in debt trying to stabilize a situation that was not mine to stabilize. I don't say that to be harsh. I say it because I think sometimes love has to look like a boundary, and that doesn't make it less like love. Patricia retired fully from teaching in the spring. The hospital threw her a small reception, and she asked me to say a few words, which I was only barely able to get through without crying. I talked about how she'd shown me what it looked like when someone showed up for you, not because they had to, but because they chose to. I said that had changed how I understood the word family. She gave me a hug afterward and said, "For the record, I got as much out of this as you did." I think she meant it. My parents came to Columbus in April. It was my mom's idea. She called and asked if she could visit, and I said yes. We had dinner at a Thai place near my apartment. My dad ordered something he didn't recognize and then ate all of it. My mom asked about my job, about my patients, about whether I was happy. Real questions. She asked them the way someone asks questions when they're trying to catch up on time they know they've lost. At one point she said, "I think we've missed a lot." I said, "Yeah, I think so too." She didn't apologize directly. I'm not sure she knew how, or if she even fully understood yet what she'd be apologizing for. But she said it. She said they'd missed a lot, and that was more than I'd expected. It was the start of something maybe, or at least it wasn't nothing. Ryan texted me in May, which was unusual enough that I actually set my phone down and looked at it for a second before reading. He asked if we could talk sometime. He said he'd been doing some thinking. I said, "Sure. Just let me know when." I haven't heard back yet. That might still happen. It might not. I'm writing this down not because I have a perfect ending to give you. I don't. My family is not fixed. My relationship with my parents is better than it was and more complicated than it looks. Patricia and I still have coffee every few weeks, and I don't know what word to use for what she is to me. Mentor is too small and too professional. Something closer to chosen family, which is a phrase I used to think was a little precious until I needed it. What I know is this. 3 days before my graduation, the people who were supposed to show up told me they had somewhere better to be. And someone who had no obligation whatsoever, who owed me nothing, bought a bouquet of yellow tulips at a grocery store and stood up in a half-empty auditorium when my name was called. That was the moment I started to understand the difference between the family you're born into and the family you build. I'm still building mine. I think I'm doing okay. I've thought a lot about what it actually means when someone shows up for you. Not the big dramatic version of it, not the movie moment, just the quiet, ordinary version. Someone buying tulips at a grocery store because they didn't want to arrive empty-handed. Someone answering the phone at 11 at night because they knew you were spiraling. Someone sliding half a slice of pie onto your plate without asking, because they knew you needed it and weren't going to say so. Patricia didn't owe me any of that. She was my clinical supervisor. Our relationship had a start date and a job title attached to it, and yet she showed up, truly showed up, in ways that people who had known me my entire life chose not to. I used to wonder if that said something terrible about me, like maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too much or not enough or somehow the reason my family kept finding somewhere better to be. I spent a long time carrying that question. What I understand now is that the way people treat you is mostly a reflection of what they've decided you can handle. My parents decided, somewhere along the way, that I was the one who could handle it, and because I kept handling it, kept showing up for myself, kept finishing what I started, kept not falling apart, they never had reason to question that decision. They read my resilience as permission. That's not a judgment on them. I think most people do this without knowing they're doing it. You find the person in your life who doesn't make noise when they're hurting and you take them for granted because they've never given you evidence that they need anything. The cost of being capable is that people stop asking if you're okay. What changes that is not anger and it's not cutting people off and it's not waiting for an apology that may never come in the form you need. What change it for me is deciding that you are allowed to need things too. That showing up for yourself is not the same as giving up on the people who should have shown up for you. Those two things can coexist. When I told my mother I couldn't help with the money in November, I wasn't punishing her. I was just finally treating my own needs with the same seriousness I'd always treated everyone else's. That felt enormous in the moment. It still does, a little. Saying no to someone you love when you spent your whole life saying yes takes more out of you than people expect. But here is what I know. Every choice compounds. My parents made small choices consistently over many years. Choices that said Ryan's comfort mattered more, that my milestones could be rescheduled, that I could handle whatever was left over. Those choices compounded into a graduation where they sat in the back row while a woman they'd never met stood up in the third row holding yellow tulips. And my choices to keep going, to find people worth trusting, to finally hold my own line, compounded into a life that is genuinely mine, not the one I had to survive, the one I actually built. I'm not all the way there yet. My relationship with my parents is still complicated in ways I don't have clean language for. Ryan still hasn't called back. There are things I've grieved and things I'm still grieving. But Patricia asked me once what I thought I deserved, and I gave her some watered-down answer, and she shook her head and said, "Try again." I think about that a lot. I'm still trying to get the answer right.